Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. My name is Karen Elliott, and I'm today's worship associate. If this is your first time here, we're so glad you've come. This is a welcoming congregation, and we are always working on how to better welcome and care for one another. Whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin, we want to acknowledge that this church occupies land in Huichin, the unceded territory of Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We understand that we continue to benefit from the seizure and occupation of this land. We acknowledge and embrace our responsibility to take restorative action. We affirm that this is deeply felt and commit our congregation to be in right relationship with Indigenous communities, aligning in solidarity, supporting Indigenous projects, and caring properly for the land. It's my great pleasure today to welcome the Reverend Scott Taylor to our virtual pulpit. Reverend Taylor has been a UU minister for 26 years, serving 4 different congregations, as well as our national UUA. He currently serves our movement as a church consultant and as the founder of Soul Matters, an organization providing UU congregations like ours with theme-based resources. His background in spiritual direction, family therapy, and storytelling deeply shapes his theological vision and preaching style. Reverend Scott lives on and runs a horse farm in upstate New York with his wife, Karen, also a UU minister, and his daughter, Neva, who just graduated from high school and who will join him today by singing for us. Reverend Scott is delighted to be with us today, as his mother is a California girl and 3 of her siblings made Berkeley and San Francisco their home. Reverend Scott's topic today examines the unique in-between time we find ourselves in, the liminal time, as we move from pandemic time back to normal, and as he will explain, hopefully a new normal. To explore that, he's inviting us to try something a bit different. Instead of a single sermon, his sharing will come to us in 2 distinct parts, with his daughter sharing a musical reflection after each section. We're pleased to be able to go on this journey of story and reflection with him and his daughter. Please take a moment now to prepare yourself and your space for our time together today. You might get a candle and a way to light it so that you can join in the chalice lighting at home. Let us kindle our candles, or the inner flames of our hearts, with words written by Reverend Scott, inspired by, and with use by words from John Shar. Building the possible. May this flame cast its light toward the coming days, reminding us that the future is not simply a place we are going, but a place we are creating. The path of new possibilities will not be found, but made. A new world is waiting to be built. May our time together help guide us on our way. I invite you now to share in the comments where you are by writing, "I carry the flame" in whatever town or city or neighborhood you are joining us from today. And now, please join us in singing "This Is My Song," our opening hymn. We sing this song together to honor today, the 4th of July, Independence Day in our country. The lyrics, set to the beautiful Finlandia tone poem by Sibelius, express the affection we have for our beautiful national home, while with open hearts we reach out beyond ourselves to sing a song of peace for all. Words will be on screen. Thank you. Please join with me in saying our covenant. Love guides this church. The quest for truth and justice is its common purpose. To give thanks, listen deeply, speak with care, honor our differences, and seek and grant forgiveness. These things we covenant with one another. We now enter the time in our service that we make for our hearts and spirits, for our cares and concerns for one another. During the time of silence, we lift up and hold the cares and challenges that we each may be facing. During this time, I invite you to participate either by dropping down into the mystery of communal silence or by sharing in the comments any joys or sorrows or significant milestones of your own. I invite us all to hold these concerns in the compassionate, quiet heart of our loving community. May we hold all these and all cares and concerns still unspoken in our loving embrace. May we also be held. Amen. And now, let me turn this over to Reverend Scott.
Hi, everyone. So I'm so grateful to be with you all this morning. And I just want to begin by lifting up a special gratitude to Reverend Michelle for inviting me to be with you today. And also just a huge thank you to the tech team and the worship team that helped guide me through this and put everything together. And I also should name right away that I want to lift up a quick thank you to my daughter, Neva, who's going to be my sidekick this morning and help me guide us through the worship, or help us navigate our worship together by playing her guitar for me in between some of the sharing that I'm going to do today. And I also should just begin by saying how especially grateful I am to all of you for letting me into your worship space, especially during this tender time of transition. During this tender time of transitioning, right, from what we've been calling pandemic time into this new time that I think most of us are referring to as a time of returning to normal. And so I just want to invite us today to spend a little bit of time exploring that in-between space. And I want to frame our time together by sharing a story about soccer. This comes from a friend of mine who is a great soccer player, but I should say right away, and he would say right away, that he wasn't always a great soccer player. He told me the story recently about the time when he was just a little tyke and he began learning soccer for the first time. And he explained that way back when he did this, he stunk, as did all of his teammates. You see, because they were just little tykes, he said, so often the ball, right, the ball, when it would come at them, would often come at their shoulder length or at their heads, and so their first instinct, right, was to raise their legs high and kick the ball, because of course what they all thought was that the most important skill of the game was to kick the ball, as fast and as hard as you could, to get it down the field as quickly as you could. But with that in mind, when those balls would come in so high, because they were so little, they would lift their leg really high up and try to kick it. And because their leg was so high, of course, you can imagine what would happen. They would sort of spin head over heels, right? With their leg missing the ball and their feet coming out from under them, or at best, sometimes they'll hit it to another team member on the opposite side of the team, or even at worst, he said they would sometimes fly it into the entire next field. And all of this, right, when they were doing this, all of this led them, my friend said, to their coach quickly teaching them the second, and what their coach called the truly most important skill of the game, which my friend referred to as settling the ball. Now, many of you who played soccer might know this already, but for those of you who don't, settling the ball is when that ball comes in high, when the soccer ball comes in high, you sort of absorb it with your body or your thighs, and you let the ball fall more calmly in front of you, right? Calmly in front of you. And the coach, my friend said, explained that the reason this was so important was with that ball slowly in front of them, just calm before they even kicked it, that would give them the time, the coach explained, to gather their skills so they could truly make it down the field successfully. And friends, this, as I think about that story, right, this is also where it seems to me we're at today with COVID, right? With everyone, right? It seems everyone's focusing on rushing and kicking that ball down the field as fast as they can to get back to the goal of normal. And yet, because of this, all of us, or most of us, are missing out on the chance to first pause, gather up the new skills we've been given, and take them with us. And so today, I simply, to put it simply, I just want to invite us into a time of settling the ball, of pausing just for a little bit to think about and gather up the new skills, the new learnings, the new gifts that ironically, even in the midst of all the mess and difficulty, that ironically COVID has given us. So we don't, right, just get back to normal, but maybe even, and hopefully even, get back to someplace better. And so to help us do that, I just want to this morning share two stories that have been helping me personally settle the ball and gather what I think are two of the important skills that I want to take with me into the new normal. And hopefully by sharing my own stories and the own skills that I feel like I've been given by COVID, hopefully that will prime the pump for you all a little bit and help you think of the skills and stories and gifts that you want to carry with you as you head down the field. And again, in between each of the stories that I'm going to share, my daughter Neva is going to help us out a bit by playing the guitar to give us a little time, all of us, you and me, a little time to think about what I've shared and help take it in your own way so you can chew on it and again, carry the skills that you've been given with you down the field. So here we go. Story number one. And it's a story about my brother Tim and green liver. It's a story that comes from my childhood, and to understand it, there's four things that you need to know before I tell it. First was that my mother was a health food nut. Second thing you need to know is that my father was in the Peace Corps when he was a younger man, and during that time in South America, he fell in love with some of the chilies that he discovered there. You also need to know, number three, that my father was a minister as we were growing up, a Mennonite minister, not a Unitarian Universalist one, and so because of that, or tied up in that, we had a dinner rule that every single night, my brother or I, the kids in the family, had to give the prayer. And because my brother and I were young, we always had to give the prayer we came up with one that we just memorized and said very quickly. And it went like this. Dear Lord, right? Dear Lord, thank you for the food that we're about to eat, and help others tonight who are not as fortunate as us. Amen. Dear Lord, thank you for this food they're about to eat, and help others tonight who are not as fortunate as us. Amen. That was it. But on this particular night, and here's where the story comes in, on this particular night before my brother, it was his turn to pray. Before he prayed, it was an odd night. We knew something was up because my mom, before we prayed, came to the table with her iron skillet in hand and a lid tight on top of that iron skillet, and her hand tight on top of that lid. And she said in a sort of apologetic, squeaky voice that we didn't understand really what was going on. She said, no, boys, before we serve dinner tonight, I've got to explain a few things about the meal before we eat it and look at it. Tim and I knew something was odd, and she kept going on and on. My dad was getting a little frustrated because he had a board meeting he had to get to. So he said, Barbara, come on, this is silly. I'm going to be late. We got to get going. Come on, this is nonsense. Let's go. She said, well, no, Chuck, I really want to remind everybody how much I care for all of your health. And so we're going to have liver and onions tonight for dinner. To which my brother and I were like, oh, God, no. And then she added, and I also, though, my mom said, I also want to remind you, Chuck, how much I know you love those green chilies. And from there, all of a sudden, I don't remember exactly, but I heard my mom say something about the iron skillet and green chilies and something about oxidation. And then finally, she lifted that lid off of that pan, that iron skillet. And inside, I swear to you, I kid you not, was liver and onions the color of grass, completely green. To which my brother and I, when we saw this mess, or this thing we couldn't even imagine, to which my brother said, oh, freaking no way am I eating that. And then he laughed, and then I laughed, and then, as is the case so often with little kids, and especially little brothers, we got ourselves cracking up and laughing more and more and more, until my brother literally at one point fell off the chair. And that sent my dad over. He was completely stressed. He said, all right, enough, boys. I've had enough of this. Tim, get back on this table. He said, get back up on this table. Let's hold hands. And Timothy, let's pray. And my brother started to try to pray, that prayer we always did, Dear Lord. And he giggled, and that sent Dad off. And he immediately said, all right, enough. God damn it, Tim, pray. And that scared my brother. So he took a deep breath, and we all held hands. We prayed. And so he lowered his head, and he was holding my hand and my mom's, and my brother started off. Dear Lord, thank you for this food that we're about to eat, and help others tonight. And right there's when he paused, and he looked up and he said, Dad, I just can't do this. There is nobody tonight less fortunate than us. And my dad laughed, and I laughed, and Mom laughed, and Tim laughed. And then suddenly, instead of this stressful moment with my dad being upset, we all just sort of looked at each other and laughed, and were enjoying each other. And here's the thing, friends. Whenever I've thought about that story or told it before, I've always focused on that laughter. I've always seen Tim, my brother, as using humor to lift up our eyes from the mess and the stress, and notice the beauty and abundance of the relationships, our families, that were surrounding us, right there in front of us. But here's the thing, lately, because of COVID, I've begun to think about that story differently, and also my brother differently. You see, I now see that moment as a moment when my brother claimed his suffering, as a moment when my brother wasn't embarrassed to claim his suffering. And here's the thing that COVID has has taught me about people claiming their suffering. More often than I like to admit, much more often than I like to admit, when that happens, when I witness people claiming their suffering, more than I like to admit, I don't honor it, I judge it. Especially when it's set right next to people who are not as fortunate as us. And again, friends, I'm not proud of it, and I have to admit that a big part of me, right? I'm not proud of it, but I have to admit that a big part of me just thinks it's self-focused. There's a little voice in my head that says it's self-focused and indulgent for comfortable folks like me and my family to complain. I suspect it's probably has a lot to do with being brought up in the Midwest, when we were told over and over again, right? You do not piss and moan, especially when people have it worse off than you. I suspect a few of us, more than a few of us, were probably brought up with those instructions and that lesson as well. And so it won't surprise many of you, I think, that earlier this spring, I was on my high horse about this as I was talking to a therapist friend. I was talking about how self-indulgent a few of my other privileged friends were being about their COVID suffering. I mean, don't they realize, I said to my friend, don't they realize that other families have people in them who have died, other people who have lost their jobs? And here are my friends, I was ranting at this point to my friend. Here are these other friends, right, complaining, truly complaining about not having to, or not being able to get to go out to eat with their friends, or how their high schooler didn't go to the prom. And then I went on and on, but I ended my rant with this beautiful, right, this beautiful flurry of adjectives describing my friends and their behavior as gross, self-indulged, some words I can't even say in worship, and finally ending my rant with the word shameful. It was right then that my friend interrupted me, and she said, "So let me get this straight, Scott. You would prefer that they feel shame?" "Well, of course not," I said unconvincingly. And then finally admitted, "Well, maybe just I'd like them to feel shame just a little bit." To which she replied by quoting a well-known social psychologist. Many of you probably know her. It's a social psychologist named Brene Brown. But quoting her, my friend said, "You do know, Scott," she said, "you do know that shame and empathy can't coexist. People can't do both at once," she said. Which, of course, right, hit me like a ton of bricks. You do know, Scott, that shame and empathy can't coexist. "So," she said, "so if you actually want someone to be more empathetic with others," she said, "shaming them is the exact opposite of what you want to do." At this point, by the way, I was beginning to feel just a little bit of shame. She went on after that to call shame a self-occupying emotion, which I thought was brilliant. I can't remember her exact words. I don't remember exactly how she explained it, but here's how at least I remember her explaining it. She said, "You see, Scott, shame doesn't make us put down our self-pity and focus on others' needs. It doesn't make the self-pity we're feeling go away. It just piles guilt onto that self-pity. So now we're not only feeling sorry for ourselves, but we're also beating ourselves up," she said, "which means also that now we're even more self-occupied, leaving absolutely no room to think or feel for people beyond ourselves." And then taking on the tone reminiscent of one of my Sunday school teachers, she ended it all by saying, "Scott, you do know, right? You do know that our hearts are big enough to hold everyone's hurt. You do know that empathy and compassion aren't finite. They're not like pizza, where if someone keeps a piece of empathy for themselves, there will be less for others. To which I said, of course, right? Of course I know that. But between you and me, in my head, I was thinking, heck no, I don't usually remember that. And friends, here's the thing. Here's for me how this all connects for me. This story connects for me to the gifts and skills and lessons that COVID has given me. You see, I think COVID and this pandemic, right? I think COVID and this pandemic has been one of those special times in our lives where remembering all of this that my friend was saying actually has not been a problem. Because it seems to me that COVID has been the only time, in my lifetime at least, when we silly monkeys, right, all across the globe, haven't easily slipped into our normal patterns of judging each other when we've claimed our suffering. It's been one of those special times, I think, when every single one of us has sort of unconsciously declared and agreed that everyone gets to feel what they're feeling. Everyone has permission to say to themselves, tonight it feels like nobody is less fortunate than me. It's been, I think, right, this one great big special time when we all seem to understand that comparative suffering ultimately helps no one. That shaming yourself or others for feeling bad about missing the prom or missing a vacation or missing going out to eat actually doesn't help that family whose father died or whose mother lost their job. So friends, that's my first skill, the first gift and skill that COVID has given me, the one that I hope I will hold on to so that when we return to normal, it actually doesn't go back to fully normal. I hope to remember, I actually hope all of us remember that shame and empathy can't coexist, that there's no guilt, right? Absolutely no guilt in complaining about the green liver you got served, that we all need to be a little bit, and maybe even more than a little bit, gentle with ourselves and others when it comes to our suffering. And most of all, I want to remember, and I hope all of us remember that our hearts are actually big enough to hold and honor everyone's hurt, the hurt of others and our own, all at the same time. And now, let me turn it over to Neva.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. Take my mind and take my pain, like an empty bottle takes the rain, and heal, 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 heal. Take my past and take my sins, like an empty sail takes the wind, and heal, 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 and tell me something's lost, and tell me something empty bottle takes the rain, and heal, 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 and tell me something's lost, and tell me something's lost.
And so now my second gift or skill that COVID has given me that I want to carry forward, and I want to get at it not just with a story but also with a quote. And the quote I want to begin with is from Annie Dillard, from her beautiful book, A Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, from a chapter called Seeing. I've been thinking about seeing, she writes. There are lots of things to see, unwrapped gifts and free surprises. The world is fairly studded and strewn with pennies cast broadside from a generous hand. But at this point, who gets excited about a mere penny? If you follow an arrow, if you crouch motionless on a bank to watch a tremulous ripple thrill on the water and are rewarded by a sight of a muskrat kid paddling from its den, will you count that sight a chip of copper only and go on your rueful way? It's a dire poverty indeed when a person is so malnourished and fatigued that they won't stoop to pick up a penny. But if you cultivate a healthy poverty and simplicity so that finding a penny will literally make your day, then, since the world is in fact planted in pennies, you will have with your poverty but a lifetime of days. It's that simple. What you see is what you get. And now my story. This one focuses on my dad. It's not from my childhood like the previous one was, but from last November, when at least it seemed, I think, to almost all of us that the end of COVID was just unimaginably out of sight and far off. And so I called him like I did often, just to check in. And right away, it was clear he was a bit depressed. And you should know, when my dad gets depressed, he slips into this preacherly mode, this preacherly voice of his. And he also is just a little bit over dramatic. And so when I asked him, he replied by saying, well, Scott, I'm not really sure how I'm feeling, he said in his low, gravelly preacher's voice. You see, I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said, about that movie, Saving Private Ryan. Remember that, Scott? Yeah, Dad, I remember that, I say. Well, then if you remember, there's this character, right, played by Tom Hanks, Dad says, whose mission is to lead a small group of soldiers deep into fighting territory and retrieve Private Ryan and bring him home to his mother, because his other 3 brothers have already been killed, and it's Army policy that the families are left with at least one son. And they find him, my dad said. They find him. You remember that, Scott? Yeah, Dad, I think I do, I say. Well, then you'll remember, he goes on, that Tom Hanks' character is mortally wounded right there at the end, and so he won't be going back with Private Ryan. But before he dies, Scott, there's that scene where he pulls Private Ryan close and he simply tells him, live a good life, son. You live a good life. You hear? And at the end of that movie, my dad says to me, do you remember what happens, Scott? No, Dad, I don't, not sure I do. Well, at the end of that movie, Private Ryan returns years later to the cemetery where Tom Hanks' character has been buried. You see his family in the background, simply dressed, strikingly normal. And Private Ryan walks over to the grave and he lays flowers right there at the foot of Tom Hanks' character's tombstone, and he says, "So, sir, I've done my best. I've tried to live a good life. I hope that's enough. I hope I've done all right." After which my dad took a deep breath and he said, So Scott, I've got to ask. I think I've lived a good life. I think I've done enough. Haven't I? There's that peace, right? That peace right there at the end that hit me hard, because that moment, right, it wasn't said with drama, just this quiet sadness. And thrown off by that sadness, I gotta admit, I didn't really respond as well as I'd liked. I mumbled, I mumbled something like of course you've done enough, Pop. You don't have to be a Tom Hanks to count. And it's not like the prize, I think I said. It's not like the prize only goes to those whose lives are movie worthy. And after I got off the phone, that's when Annie Dillard's Pennies, right? Pennies versus chips of copper came to mind and came back to me. And with that talk of chips of copper in my head, I realized, sort of for the first time, I realized that the depletion of COVID, wasn't just making my dad think about isolation. It was making him think about endings. It had put him in this place, I think, of not just worrying about the future, but also assessing the past. And I think, friends, I think that one of the reasons he was struggling a bit with that was because he was doing that assessing largely through our culture's lens of worthiness, which so often, right, only puts value on the so-called extraordinary things, treating everything else that is ordinary only as a chip of copper. I mean, I told my dad, right, I told my dad that the prize doesn't just go to the movie worthy, but that's not really what society believes. And because of that, it's also what a big part of my dad has ended up believing. Or to put it another way, I think on that phone call, my dad was a man burdened by and even haunted by bigness. And so he wasn't, at least in that moment, able to see how many shiny pennies, how there were so many shiny pennies surrounding him. And looking back, I wish, I really do, I wish now that's what I would have said on the phone. I wish I would have reminded him about what I saw on so many of my visits to his home prior to COVID. Like how much I love that little log cabin of his that my mom and he built on the 40 acres of woods in Indiana where they lived before my mom died. It was their dream home, so much of it built with my dad's own hands. Or I wish I would have reminded him of how I've always loved watching him do his woodworking. He's a lathe worker, and makes these beautiful bowls that he actually never was ever proud enough to sell, but always shared them with family and friends, especially when they were sick or struggling. And I wish looking back, I would have reminded him about that time when that Amish couple, stopped by the house when my dad was recovering from heart surgery. They brought him this low-fat pie and told me how much they loved my dad's practical jokes and also how much how much he meant to them, because when their son was struggling with depression, my dad had taken him under his wing and taught him wood turning, and how learning to create beauty like that had literally, they said, helped bring their son back to life. There's also those images of my father sitting on the front porch with his sister, and how beautiful I've always thought that was, because, it's not everyone who has achieved a sibling relationship where they not only love each other, but they also like each other. And I also wish I would have lifted up for him that image of that tiny country church up on a hill that he served so faithfully and for so long, so many years. So many pennies, at least in my eyes, so many shiny pennies piled up all around my father. Clear proof, right, of a well-lived life. And yet there he was, my dad, right, struggling, really, really struggling to see them as anything more than chips of copper. And right there, friends, for me at least, is where the gift or the lesson or the skills of COVID come in for me. Because while it may have caused, right, while COVID may have caused some folks like my dad to get in a funk about worthiness, I truly believe that for most of us, COVID has had the opposite effect. For most of us, I believe, by stripping away the opportunity to pursue the extraordinary, the bigness, COVID has ironically shrunk our lives, or did shrink our lives, in actually a good way, right? I mean, it's left all of us surrounded by these so-called chips of copper. Quiet nights with families, walks with our dogs, calls and emails from only our closest friends, nothing to do on Friday nights but to sit around with family and share memories. Nowhere to go out and eat, but only a chance to cook and laugh together. No big adventures to pursue, but only those so-called beauties, small beauties to enjoy. Removed from the normal buzz and busyness of life, we were forced out of lives of doing and had to learn more about living lives of just being. Striving for success suddenly didn't steal the entire stage. Playing guitar or learning to paint seemed much more important than the size of our retirement portfolios. And we were forced, right? I think all of us were forced to notice that as much as they sometimes annoy us or get under our skin, our family members and close friends are actually remarkable and astoundingly beautiful, and that we're astoundingly lucky to have them in our lives. And friends, I gotta believe that as we've been forced by COVID to stare at and live with all this ordinariness for so long, I've got to believe that at some point during COVID, all of us have had this moment when we suddenly, when suddenly these so-called chips of copper have transformed right in front of our eyes into the shiny, beautiful pennies that they are. And so friends, yeah, I'm just not all that sure about all that excitement about getting back to normal. I mean, frankly, I don't want it. I don't want it if it turns all of our ordinariness into chips of copper again. I don't want bigness to re-enter the scene and blind me, at least just me, like it usually does. I want to remember that, you can chase the extraordinary, or you can capture meaningful moments. But it's really hard to do both. And I want us all, right? Not just my father, to know that we've done all right. That we are actually always already all right. And that caring for and tending to small things is no small thing. May that also be a skill all of us carry with us into the new day. May it be so. Amen.
My, it's a beautiful world. I like swimming in the sea. I like to go out beyond the white breakers, where a man can still be free, or a woman if you are one. I like swimming in the sea. My, it's a beautiful world. I like drinking Irish tea with a little bit of lapsang souchong. I like making my own tea. My, it's a beautiful world. I like driving in my car. I roll the top down, sometimes I travel far. Drive to the oceans, stare up at the stars. I like driving in my car. All around is anger, automatic guns, death in large numbers, no respect for women or our little ones. Try talking to Jesus, but he just put me on hold. Said he was swamped by calls this week, and he could not shake his cold. Still this emptiness persists. Perhaps this is good as it gets. When you've given up the drink and those nasty cigarettes, I'll leave the party early, at least with no regrets. I watch the sun as it comes up, and I'll watch it as it sets. Yeah, this is as good as it gets.
As we commit together to make this a loving community, we take time to remember that UUCB needs our gifts and support. We invite you now to make an offering. Each week, half our offerings are shared with a good neighbor organization who needs our financial support. We're so glad you continue to practice generosity with them through these difficult times. Our good neighbor for July is the Lavender Seniors of the East Bay. Their mission is to improve the lives of older lesbian, gay, transgender, and queer residents of Alameda and Contra Costa counties. Karen Anderson, their Friendly Visitors Program Coordinator, has recorded a short video.
Hi, I'm Karen Anderson from Lavender Seniors of the East Bay, and I want to tell you a little bit about the members of our organization. Our seniors came of an age when it was criminal or psychologically, sexually, and mentally deviant to be LGBT. They were beaten, fired from jobs, evicted from their own homes or disowned by family, dishonorably discharged from the military, hospitalized in psychiatric wards, harassed, arrested, or even lost legal custody of their children merely because of their sexual identity. Thus, for many LGBTQ persons, the only way to survive was to be closeted, to hide their sexual orientation and gender identity from family, employers, and officials, and attempt to pass as heterosexual. Federal marriage laws that discriminated against LGBTQ seniors may have had a devastating effect on seniors. Access to Social Security survivor benefits, Medi-Cal, and long-term care benefits may have left an LGBTQ senior vulnerable to poverty and health disparities. Lavender Seniors addresses these issues by increasing access to supportive direct services and advocating through coalitions for the advancement of LGBTQ legal protections. We encourage our volunteers to create social networks for our seniors. By helping to build networks of support, we better enable our seniors to age in place and improve their quality of life. We're always looking for skilled community-minded leaders to serve on our board of directors or to act as volunteers to assist us in our outreach services. We invite you to further review our mission at lavenderseniors.org. Thank you.
Offerings of any value are received with gratitude. Details on how to give electronically will appear on your screen as our offertory begins. Thank you.
There's a new world coming, and it's just around the bend. There's a new world coming. This one's coming to an end, and there's a new voice calling, and you can hear it if you try, and it's growing stronger with every day that passes by. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a brand new world coming.
Oh, yes, it is.
Rising clear and sweet and free.
So free.
There's a new day dawning.
Yes, it's dawning.
That belongs to you and me.
Yes, it does.
Yes, a new world's coming.
New world.
You know the one I'm talking about, the one we've had visions of, and it's coming in peace, coming in joy, coming in peace, coming in joy, coming in peace, coming in joy, coming in love. There's a new
world coming,
world coming,
and it's just
and it's
around
just
the
around the bend. And there's a new world coming. This one's coming to an end. And there's a new voice calling, and you can hear it if you would just give it a try. And it's growing stronger with every day that passes by. And there's a brand new morning, rising clear and sweet and free. And there's a new day dawning that was always for you joy.
Yes. Come and enjoy.
Coming in the peace. Yes. Coming in the love. Yeah. Coming in the peace. Coming in peace. Coming in peace. Coming in peace. 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 Coming in joy.
Please join me in dedicating our offering. We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service. It's been good being together again today. Before we say goodbye or shift to Zoom coffee hour, let me remind you to check our website, uucb.org, if you haven't looked at it lately. There, among many other things, you can find an easy link in news to the week ahead, our email newsletter, and to Beacon on the Hill, our monthly publication. The website is rich with information. As we prepare to leave, here are a couple of announcements. First, this coming Wednesday evening, July 7th, the Board of Trustees will hear takeaways from our delegates and attendees to last week's UUA General Assembly, items that relate to our congregations and UUCB's future. Everyone is welcome to attend. Please come. The board meeting itself starts at 7 p.m. This item will be up at around 7:30, give or take a bit. See the church calendar on our website for the Zoom link. 2, remember that the interesting summer forum talks take place on Zoom most Sunday mornings throughout the summer, starting at 9:20 a.m. Check the week ahead or the church calendar for the Zoom link and the topic. There will be no closing song today. Instead, we will close with words by our guest preacher, Reverend Scott Taylor. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been so good to be with you, friends. And now as we go our separate ways, I offer these closing words. As so much was closed, we were opened. Normal was taken, but it was also turned inside out. Very little is inevitable. Most of it is a choice. This is what we have learned. So now the question comes, do we really want to go back? We can weave a new world, friends. The straw can be spun into gold. A door has swung wide, with possibility trying to pull us through. So may today mark our first step, and may it be one that we take side by side. May it be so. Amen.